Most of you know what tonight is. If you have a sports pulse at all, of course, it's Super Bowl Sunday. Super Bowl is really, it's the culmination of all football seasons. I mean, it is the football game of all football games. And what it represents is years and years of preparation and discipline. When we met the last time we talked about James, when we discussed verses 3 through 5, and I brought out that old axiom with which most of you are familiar, and you did a great job of repeating it back to me. We said the phrase, no pain, no gain. Oh, you guys, great memory, you're right with me. No pain, no gain. And we know that is true in life, and especially in relates to things of physical development, and we talk about, here we have football players who have gone through an extreme amount of preparations and practice. For any young man who's ever played football, you know that dreaded phrase, two-a-days. Two-a-days. If you don't know what two-a-days is or to what it refers, two-a-days, because football season starts before school starts, or the practice does. So two-a-days are something coaches have available to them because the kids aren't in school. So they practice in the morning and they practice at night. Now, you may have read some of the news headlines that some of the two-a-days can be so brutal. They've even had kids die. How many of you read that in the headlines? I mean, those are horrible, extreme tragedies, but that speaks to how difficult two-a-days are. I mean, just the conditioning and the workouts are grueling, and the whole process, the whole attempt for those coaches is that so these young men, when it comes to the fourth quarter, or when they have that overtime game, or when they get into November and they're a little bit beat up, they're going to be stronger and have greater endurance. And so those two-a-days, even though every football player hates them, unless he's just kind of weird, that they begin to understand its benefits. I talked about preseason basketball practice, where we didn't touch a ball for weeks. We're like, Coach, this is basketball practice, so this is not track. Hit the line, run, wind sprints, line drills, and just run. It's that preseason conditioning so that when we get to those into the games, and we had that physical stamina and dominance. So we use that phrase, no pain, no gain. Now, we understand in some areas of life the benefits of going through a struggle. Now, when we come to James chapter 1, we go back all the way to the first talk we had a few weeks ago, when we talked about verses 1 and 2. Remember what we said? We said point number 1 is that from James, we need to have a new attitude when it comes to trials. And really, it needs to be a right, a proper attitude. And here's what it is, he says in 1 and 2. And we really talked about what a bad attitude is. We did the contrast. We said the bad attitude or the wrong attitude is an attitude of entitlement. Now, don't we bring that to trials? I deserve something better than what's happening to me. God, why did you allow this to happen? I am a good person. I don't know how many times I've heard that. I didn't deserve this. I look at somebody else. They deserve it. I didn't deserve it. And that's entitlement. And James attacks that. And he says, I'm not James, the entitled brother of Jesus. I'm James, the slave of God. Whatever he wants to do with my life, it's up to his will. He said not only entitled, but we also don't want to have the misconception that we're going to be sheltered. Probably the other complaint I hear when people go through trials and the frustrations that we have is that, why didn't God shelter me? We will use the word hedge. God, put a hedge of protection about me. And we'll pray that in all areas of life. And then when something gets over that hedge, we just panic. God, why did you allow this to happen to me? And we have this notion that's not in the Bible that we should somehow be sheltered. And James says, I'm not writing to the sheltered tribes. I'm writing to the scattered, the dispersed. And that had a whole significant meaning to these people because God was actually the one that scattered them. He took them out of their comfort zone. He put them in an area and a place with which they were not familiar, which they did not desire to go. He actually forced them into that position, and he said, don't be entitled. Don't feel that God owes you some sort of a security or shelteredness, that God may actually be putting you through this trial on purpose. So have the right attitude. He said, face it with joy. And then when we talked the second week, we said that we are not only to have the right attitude, but we should have this reassurance that there are advantages. Now that's the old phrase, no pain, no gain. And we said the Marine Corps have a way of saying it, that pain is weakness leaving the body. That actually the process to growth and strength is going to be many times through a painful trial or ordeal. And we come to the end of verse 4 in James, and James says it this way. He says, so that you may be mature and complete. What he's saying is God has a whole big plan and purpose. God is like that coach looking at the end of the season in mind. God is like that coach who's looking ahead to the overtime game and saying, what you're going to experience right now, you are going to need this to be complete. And in our immaturity and in our doubt, we look at the little episodes and we become frustrated and we don't see the advantages. So James reminds us. Now, when we come to verse 5, and if you have your Bibles there in verse page, if you're using your Pew Bible there, page 1880, we're going to talk about something in just a moment here in verse 5. Now, I want to stay with the sports analogy for just a moment, so please stay with me, okay? If you're some grandmother going, I don't know where you're going with this. All right, stay with me now. We're going to stay with, if you've ever done any weightlifting, okay, how many of you know weightlifting, you know the process, you've been to the gym, you've put on some plates and done some reps, okay? A few of you know what I'm talking about. All right, sure. And if you've ever gone through an intentional weight training, you want to develop strength, it is essential for you to reach your maximum. It is essential for you to have a good spotter. You know the concept of spotter. A spotter is there to help you in your training. Now here's what a spotter will do. And let's say you're bench pressing and you want to get stronger in your bench press, or you want to get to more reps, or you want to put on more weight. And so you go and you work out. And what a spotter will do, he'll come alongside and he will help you and assist you in this process of lifting weights. Now, what a bad spotter will do, and I would hate this when this would happen. I'd grab a guy and say, hey, man, will you spot me? And then as soon as you start struggling, he goes, whoa, let me help you with that. And he picks it right up. I'm like, no, that's not what a good spotter does. A good spotter just doesn't take the weight off of you at the first sign of a struggle. So here's what a good spotter will do. A good spotter will know that when you start to struggle, that is actually when you're starting to build muscle. That's when you're starting to tear it down, and then it's going to rebuild even stronger. So when you start to really feel that pain and that struggle, then the spotter lets you do another one, and you get to that. Some of you have done the bench press before, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to make it. And the spotter will give just a little touch, right? Just a couple pounds of pressure release. And that little bit will help you push it all the way up. And I'll say, a good spotter will say, do another one. So if you're advanced, you'll really do another one. And then when I was in college, we used to do something really crazy. We would max out the spots, and then we would do what we called a negative. So then we would just like hold it as long as we could, and it would like slowly, and then finally, and then the spotter would ultimately take the weight off. Maybe you can't relate to it in a weightlifting sense, but maybe some of you have been through physical therapy. If you've ever had a knee replacement or shoulder surgery or hip surgery, and you've had to go through PT, and those physical therapists, they know how to push you, right? And sometimes they push you farther than you think you can go, and it hurts. But they know your capabilities. And they don't completely help you. They might assist you walking. They might come there and bend your knees. Whatever, they go through this therapeutic process, and what they're there as a spotter, as a trainer, as a PT who's going to help you reach your rehabilitation maximum. Now, when we come to verse 5, where James has now talked about the right attitude and the right advantages, he says, let me tell you about the assistance you have for your trials. Like a physical therapist or a spotter, and I'm not, of course, not talking derogatorily about God in any way, but using this analogy that he's going to come along, and in that struggle, and in that trial, and in that grueling process, that he will come along and give just enough help, just the amount you need to maximize and to get the benefit out of your trials. Let's see if we can read this in verse 5. If you have your Bibles, read along with me. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. Now, I'll have to pause for just a moment. I have to address something here. If you have been to church more than you have not been to church, okay, if you are a regular church person, it is inevitable that you have heard this verse used out of context. Let me give you an example. I've heard this verse quoted a bunch of times, and usually it's something like this. Somebody wants to buy a new car or vehicle. And so someone says, hey, James says you ought to pray and ask God for wisdom, and he'll let you know how to make the right decision. Or I've been offered a job in another city, and I may need to relocate, and it sounds like a great job, and I'm not sure